Hello, BEA beautiful people, and we are back for another deck tech. Going to cover a budget mono red build today. This is 4 rares, legal as of Ravnica Allegiance, and doing pretty good for such a cheap deck. So if you're looking at getting into that black-red aggro deck, this is going to get you started. And from there, we should be able to upgrade this deck pretty consistently. This will get you the wins you need, start getting the gold coming in, get those packs bought, get the wild cards, get your progression through the track. Super, super fast deck, super, super cheap. And with that speed, you should be able to kind of mitigate the almost coin flip that it has. Now, the black-red aggro deck is super popular, so you're starting to see some counters to it pop up. But we're going to go from there and try and go over the top of it. So here's the deck. What you're looking at is a purely mono red, super low to the ground, just aggressive, burn them to the face, get it done, get out, get you another game in. My practice with this, I have run probably about 60-ish%, 65. It's a little bit in between the two. With that kind of win ratio, you're not going to progress in short bursts. You know, you're not going to win 5, lose 4. You're definitely going to be more on the goal of trying to win 2, lose 1, win 2, lose 1. But the cool thing is that if you've got 5 minutes, you can knock out a game. If you've got half an hour, you can knock out 5 games. You can really put the numbers in. Now, it's repetitive. I'll give you that. But it gets the job done. You are looking at cheap creatures. You're looking at enabling powerful spells, powerful discounts to make those spells even more effective. And with a little bit of practice on your belt, because there definitely is some skill intensity to this. A lot of people think that these burn decks, these super low to the ground aggro decks, things like that, are just mindless, easy to play. You know, I don't have to think. I'm just going to get it done. Now, if you played a bunch of them, yeah, it probably is in that. If you look at a low-to-the-ground mono-red deck from 10 years ago, you know, it doesn't play a whole lot differently than one from right now. But if you're used to playing, you know, mid-range Golgari decks, controlling blue-white, Esper, Teamer, you know, whatever you're looking at decks, this is a completely different thing, because if you make a wrong decision, it costs you more than in like those control decks. If you counter the wrong spell on a control deck, you still have 5, 6, 10, 12 backups so that you can buy yourself the extra turn or 2 you need to get back in the game. In this, there is no extra turn or 2. Your goal is to reduce the amount of time that you play a game of Magic. And so all of that decision making gets concentrated down into 6, 7, 8 turns as opposed to 15 or 20 turns. So one mistake is just amplified. And so you really, really need to get a little practice in with it, get the reps in, get to understanding, you know, certain orders, which ones are going to be better, understand your matchups and stuff like that. So things like, you know, with Fanatical Firebrand, do I just always attack? You know, do I cast my Lightning Strike? Do I cast, you know, Viashino Pyromancer? What do I do in what order? When do I cast Rift's Factor? Those kind of things. So we'll go over the cards a little bit first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about strategy and you know, the deck matchups and things like that. Obviously, we got 4 Fanatical Firebrands. The monkey here is great. Good old Goblin Pirate, 1 mana, 1/1, haste, gets in there. You know, it's going to get your early damage on. And then your sacrifice effect to deal 1 damage to any target. Let you pick off Jade Light Rangers and Merfolk Branchwalkers before the Explore trigger. Lets you turn 2 damage from some other spell or 3 damage from some other spell into, you know, +1, so you can take out larger threats if you need to. And if they've managed to get the ground shored up completely, this gives you another way to go straight to the face. That way you can bypass any creatures that are in your way and trigger Spectacle, which we're definitely going to bring up in this because it heavily relies on that. Gitu Lava Runner, to be honest, this guy's actually not that great in this deck. You know, he's a 2/2 with haste, probably 50-ish% of the time, maybe a little more. But he has a really, really important word on his text box, well, on the card. It says Wizard. and we need the Wizard for the discount on Wizard's Lightning. And that's almost 100% of the reason that he's in the deck. If we had even a slightly more aggressive and one-drop creature that had Wizard in his text box and fit into red, we'd probably look at playing that, to be honest. But when it comes to a one-drop Wizard, this guy is the most effective answer. It's that simple. And, you know, occasionally you've got a 2/2 body that can get in for a couple points of damage. Most of the time, this guy could be an enchantment that said all your Wizard spells get their discount. And you'd be perfectly fine with that. 4 Spear Spewers. I say that 5 times fast. It seems weird to be in an aggressive aggro, you know, burn them to the face kind of deck and to play an 0/2 Defender. This is something that red decks have probably never done. And I think it's awesome to actually be including something like this. So this guy, he is an 0/2, so he'll block random 1/1s. I mean, maybe that's important. There is definitely several token decks out there. You can get your block, save you a point or two of damage here. And then you can tap him to deal 1 damage to each player. So it's going to hurt you too, but since you're a burn deck, you don't really care as long as it also hurts them. The idea being that I need to hurt them at all costs. And the other really big benefit here is, again, with creatures out on the field, this guy is going to enable your Spectacle. He's going to deal 3, 4, 5 points of damage over the course of the game. And it lets you not have to get into combat once you're no longer favored in combat. And, your guys are small. That's going to happen fast. We move up to our 2-drops. Again, here we have what seems like the weirdest thing for a red burn aggro deck to actually be playing. And this is a 2-mana 0/4 Defender. Literally has the creature type Wall, for God's sake. Like, this is unheard of in the history of red decks. But this guy alone, he's going to block creatures so that you can make it where you're always going to win the race. And he's going to be +1 on all your damage spells, on all your instants, all your sorceries, everything you do. And this deck casts a lot of them. I know we covered 12 creatures in the beginning, and here's another 4, so we're at 16 creatures. And we still have another playset of creatures to come, but we're also running 20 spells. And you cast a lot of spells in this deck, don't get me wrong. So this guy, 3, 4 damage, maybe protects you from 3, 4, 5, 6 damage over the course of a game. He's just going to guarantee that you win that race. And he's also hard to remove. So, like, your opponent's decks aren't going to, if they have Lava Coil, sure, that'll work. But Lightning Shock's not going to get it done. Shock's not going to get it done without 2-for-1ing your opponent. And that's awesome. If they're wasting burn spells here, great. If they're wasting removal spells, your creatures in this don't really matter. So this is probably the most important creature you have in your deck. Firebrand, Lava Runner, Spear Spewer, and later we're going to talk about Pyromancer. Those guys really don't need to stick around. Spear Spewer being the most obvious and wants to be around. But, again, your creatures just are not important. These are spells that have power and toughness. Those, spells that have power and toughness, we call creatures. But in this case, they just don't matter. Our last creature on the list, Viashino Pyromancer, 2 mana, 2/1. Again, that part's virtually irrelevant. What this says is deal 2 damage to your opponent and has that key type Wizard. So this gives us 8 Wizards in the deck for the discount on the 4 Wizards Lightnings. And maybe this guy gets in for 2 more. I mean, 2 mana for 4 damage to your opponent. Awesome. 2 mana for 4 damage to your opponent and 4 spells in your deck get a 66% discount on their casting cost. Even better. So we're running the whole gamut here of creature types. We've got the Goblin Pirate Monkey. We've got the actual Human Wizard. We've got a Goblin Warrior, a Wall that's just some technological thing, and a Viashino Wizard. So we've got it all covered. We might as well be Simic at heart here at this point. We've gone full experimentation. Now we get into the spells. So Lightning Strike over Shock. 3 damage is much more important. The 1 mana doesn't make that huge of a difference because we're burning at the end of the game, so we're going to have 4 or 5 mana or so. and 1 is probably not going to make all that difference. If you want to try Shock, feel free. I think the extra point of damage is much more important. There's not a whole lot to say more about Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike has been around forever. We all know it's a good card. You know, Lightning Bolt was too powerful, and they had to add a mana onto it, and it's still a good card. Speaking of Lightning Bolt, we run 8 of them. So these may not look like Lightning Bolts, Wizards Lightning and Skewer the Critics, but they just are. So we run into 8 Wizards to make this cost 1. A couple of games I didn't have a Wizard, and you know it cost 3, and that was unfortunate. Card's still fine. It definitely feels bad to cast it for 3, but when you cast it for 1, you feel like you're cheating. And to be honest, I mean you are. Lightning Bolt was considered too powerful for the format of Standard, so they just stopped printing it. Well, they gave us Lightning Bolt again. We just have to jump through a hoop to get there. Red decks, if they're good at anything, they're good at jumping through hoops. You know, you're talking about, in the past, we've had Hellbent, where it's like, all right, you need to get to know cards in hand. Yeah, sure. That's not hard. All right, now I've got to have a creature with a specific type. Sweet, you printed a couple of aggressive creatures with that type. I'll just jam those into the deck. Red decks are great at jumping through these little hoops in order to make burn spells be way too powerful. The other one is Skewer the Critics. So Skewer the Critics is funny to me. It is a sorcery, so it's not an actual true Lightning Bolt. You know, you can only cast it on your turn, so it's more, you know, Lava Dart or whatever the one was, the Lava Strike, the one that deals 3 to an opponent. It's more similar to that, where it has this restriction that actually matters. So occasionally the fact that it's a sorcery will matter. But it's hoop that you have to jump through. And like we said, Red's great at jumping through these hoops in order to make burn spells too powerful. The hoop here blows my mind. The hoop is deal damage to your opponent. Are you kidding me? That's my whole plan already. So what you're saying is, in order to get Lightning Bolt, I need to do what I was already planning to do anyhow. I gotcha. I can do that. Thanks. And this card is constantly triggered for the most part. Between Spear Spewer, Fanatical Firebrand, Electrostatic Pillar, or Field, sorry. Electrostatic Field, Vioshino Pyromancer. It's just Lightning Bolt all the time on your turn. Always. I don't understand how they thought that this card was more fair than Lightning Bolt. But we've got it, so we're going to play with it. And then let's talk about one more spectacle card here, Light Up the Stage. So when Light Up the Stage got spoiled, there was a lot of interest in it. People were talking about, oh, you know, it's a sorcery, you've got to deal damage first, yada yada. A bunch of things kind of hating on it. But again here, we have a 1-mana spell that draws 2 cards. Red would pay 2 life. They'd pay 4 life for 1 mana draw 2 cards. I know a lot of decks that would just any day pay 1 mana and some ridiculous amount of life to draw 2 cards. If this literally said, pay 4 life, draw 2 cards, you would play it in a heartbeat. So now we don't have to pay life, our opponent does. And again, that was our plan all along, was deal damage to our opponent. So again, I look at Wizards and I go, so you want me to continue to just kill my opponent? And then I get to be better at killing my opponent? Oh, okay. I got you, Wizards. Sure. 2 thumbs up. I understand. And so with this card, what we're looking at is a sorcery that exiles the top 2 cards of your library. And this is an important part that I have to admit, the first time I read it, I missed this. Until the end of your next turn. And I missed next. I'm not going to lie. Somebody was like, you do realize that it's next turn. And I was like, what? This card can't be real. They would never do that, right? Yeah, so this card's real. And then you may play those cards, which means you can play lands. It's not, it's not cast, so it locks you out of lands and everything like that. Which is kind of an important way of how you play this card, too. And we'll cover little intricacies that I've kind of stumbled across as we go along. But yeah, so, reveal the top or exile the top 2 cards, and I can just play them until the end of my next turn. This card is bananas. Actual BANANAS bananas. Last card in the deck before we get to the super complicated mana base here is our one and only playset of rares. You need 4 rares to build this deck, guys. You could probably build this deck after a couple of hours of playing from a brand new account. And if you buy the $5 intro pack and then use your gems to go do a draft or do a sealed or something like that, and you do even semi-decently at that, you can probably build this deck day one. 4 risk factors, we're all pretty familiar with it. It got a lot of hate because it's a Punisher card. The Griefer cards never really get all the love. I was very pro this card. A buddy of mine, who shall remain nameless, he was not. He had no interest in this. He wanted nothing to do with it. It's a Griefer card. It can't be good. But Jumpstart, I think, makes all the difference in the world when it comes to this card. The ability to cast it again from your graveyard simply by discarding a card. And if you played these red decks before in the past, you'll know that at some point lands are just completely and utterly irrelevant. So pitch a land, cast it again. Worst case scenario, you char them for 4. You get to do 4 points of damage. Best case scenario, they let you draw 3 cards. Now, in the old versions of the deck that were running Risk Factor previous to Ravnica Allegiance, I thought there were a lot of occasions where it may actually be right to let your opponent draw the 3 cards, because you could limit them on their mana. They would have 3 or 4 mana, and so you could stop them from casting, triple spell next turn if they drew it, or they would draw a land and that was kind of useless, or they draw 2 lands and then that was a pretty bad risk factor. And there were definitely scenarios, I think, where you can just be like, all right, draw, and I just won't take the damage. If you were like Golgari, for instance, and you didn't get the turn 2 Wild Growth Walker, turn 3 Jade Light Ranger, gain 6, I have a 3/5. If you didn't get that, you needed to buy an extra turn against the red decks, maybe even 2. And just letting them have the cards a lot of time would be fine, because if you could set up that Wild Growth Jade Light later on turn 5 in the same turn, then you were right back into the game and you had all the time in the world to do what you needed to do, and you would eventually win. This deck, though, I think no one can let you draw 3 cards in this deck. So in several of the matchups that I played, I cast Risk Factor when my opponent's at a high life total. Obviously, if they're at a low life total, they're going to let you draw the cards and hope that you stumble on mana or get a bad risk factor. They're just not going to take the damage down to 4 and risk it. Even empty-handed, they just can't do that. So at a high life total, that's where they get the decision. Paying life isn't such a big deal then. Maybe I let them have the cards, yada yada. Well, it happened, both ways. And every single time they let me draw the 3 cards off the first one or the Jumpstart copy, they died. And they died shortly after. And part of that was on the backs of Light Up the Stage. Because with Light Up the Stage, if you draw one of those, 3 now becomes 5 cards. Or 4 if you don't count the Light Up the Stage. So 3 becomes 4. I drew 2 Light Up the Stages. 3 becomes 5. It starts to just snowball a little bit. And with Electrostatic Field, more spells equals more better. So, and yeah, I said more better. That's right. So now you've got Electrostatic Field, you risk factor them, they either take 5 or they let you draw 3 cards. And the fact that we are only running 20 lands, 2 of those are usually spells. Now, about half of them are creatures. So before, let's say we don't have Electrostatic Field when we cast it, and we draw creature, spell, land. Then we've got a land that doesn't do anything to them. We've got a creature that may deal 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 damage if they have nothing to do with it. But it's a creature and it doesn't, it's kind of irrelevant. And then we draw a spell, and that's pretty much the same. Now with Electrostatic Field, they have to either take 5 or let us draw 3 cards. Now let's say in the same scenario, we get creature, spell, land. Well, the land, again, is irrelevant. The creature is also kind of irrelevant. But now the spell deals +1 damage. Now, in the scenario where you have 2 land or 2 spells, or even 3 spells, all of a sudden, instead of taking 5, now they're taking those 2 or 3 spells plus 2 or 3 more damage. And it just ends up snowballing again and again. And like I said, if you get into light up the stage along with it, you start to chain these spells over and over and over and over. And the risk factor is going to trigger Spectacle because of the electrostatic field. So now light up the stage is guaranteed to cost 1 without any other effort from you. So you just cast spell after spell after spell after spell, chain them off, get 4 or 5 points of damage out of it anyhow, and that's on top of whatever the card you drew actually did. And then, like I said, super complicated mana base, 20 mountains. I've even considered 18 and trying to maybe jam a couple shocks in here or something like that. We don't have a sideboard for this. This is for the current best of 1. This deck shouldn't have a sideboard anyhow. Once you get to the point where you're building a sideboard, we're going to look at the black-red deck later on. Once it's kind of, the numbers need to be worked out a little bit. And with that one, we'll have an optional sideboard for it too. The black-red deck is definitely much more rare intensive, much more complicated in what it does. This has one goal in mind. Is my opponent's life total 0 or less? No, burn you, burn you, burn you, burn you, burn you. Now, let's talk about some of the intricacies of the deck before we move, past all of this kind of uber aggro, super cheap, and we get into some of the more complicated decks, maybe that aren't quite so budget friendly. But there are a couple of things that I noticed as I was playing. Obviously, you want to cast risk factors late because you want them in this deck to let you draw the 3 cards as often as possible. If you got to cast it early, you got to cast it early. But if you have the option of risk factor, or I'm holding a Wizard's Lightning in my hand that costs the full 3, I would definitely pass the turn and highly consider not casting risk factor unless I just don't have a plan for what I'm doing going forward. If I've got risk factor and Wizard's Lightning and they have no creatures, I definitely don't really want to burn them to the face with a full costed Wizard's Lightning. I would much rather risk factor and hope for the best, because then I can use the Wizard's Lightning afterwards. But if it's like Lightning Strike and a Lava Runner in hand and risk factor, I'm probably going to play the Lava Runner and look to Lightning Strike either them or their face and then save the risk factor. The other thing I noticed too was with Light Up the Stage, because you can play lands, I find myself wanting to do this before I make my land drop more often than not. And the main reason is that next turn clause. So if I do this and I flip 2 lands and I haven't played my land, I just get to play both of those lands. I get to play one on this turn, and then on the next turn I get to play another one again. So I didn't lose any value. I drew 2 lands. That's, that probably would have killed me in a normal red deck if I'd drawn 2 lands in a row. But now, because of Light Up the Stage, it was just a bump in the road, and we get to move on. So you definitely want to trigger this before you play your land. And you want to trigger this with something that is cheap or free, like a Spear Spewer or a Fanatical Firebrand activation, that once the Firebrand has not been able to attack through. So once they've locked up the ground and you can't get in and attack with Firebrand, feel free to use him to dome them for 1 so that you can trigger Spectacle and light up the stage. And then, hit a land or hit spells or something like that. So we can run these 20 lands because, yes, I have 16 3-drops here. But we're going to cast this one for 1 95% of the time. We're going to cast this one for 1 95% of the time. And probably 75% of the time we're going to cast this one for 1. So we really only have 1 true 3-drop in the deck, and that's Risk Factor. And again, like I said, this wants to be your last spell anyhow, once their life total is, 10, 12, or less. And, that way you can draw the additional 3 cards. So while it may look like we actually have a very 3-heavy deck, these 12 cards kind of belong in this line. And with that, you're looking at having, the full 24 1-drops, 12 2-drops, 4 3-drops, and 20 lands. And that's definitely the curve that's more consistent with a 20-land deck. Like I said, I was looking at potentially 18, and I may give that a try. We ran this through a few games, and it had that 65-ish % win chance that we were talking about in the beginning. And I think that's fine for a lot of people, especially when you're talking about an ultra budget deck. You're talking about a deck with 4 rares that you can grind rank with and easily make your wins. And even at 65%, with as fast as this is, if you have 1 hour to play every day, you'll be able to complete your quests, you'll be able to complete your wins, and you'll be able to move up in ranks for very, very little investment in time and in wildcards. And you can use this deck to not only move up in rank, but to gain gold, gain more wildcards, get your wins in, and start to snowball your collection. And I think when we look at budget decks, which I will probably do a video on, how to determine what a quote-unquote budget deck is in Arena, this is what I'm talking about. We need something that somebody can build day one, maybe day two of a Magic Arena, and that's going to mean 4 rares, 8 at the absolute most. And if you guys disagree with me, let me know down in the comments below on if you consider, are you on the 4 rare camp, the 8 rare camp, the 0 rare camp? What is my guideline for a budget deck? I feel like 4 is safe, 8 might be pushing it, but if the deck is just absolutely outstanding and has to have those 8 rares to be outstanding, then I think I may push it to 8. We'll go ultra budget, the 0 rares. That one's going to be a tough one, but we are going to definitely revisit budget decks in the future. The idea being that we need to show people what we are going to give you to start playing Magic Arena. And another thing that I'm going to do is probably once a month, I'm going to revisit any budget decks that we actually covered, the ones that have the most popularity, either in comments or thumbs up or anything like that. We're going to actually advance to the next level. We're going to see my budget's cleared up. I've got, 20 rare wildcards and 5 mythic wildcards laying around, and I want to take one of your budget decks to the next level. And that's what we'll be doing. So stay tuned for that. That'll be next level Magic. And with that, like I said, we'll upgrade those decks. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up, and leave a comment down below on your idea when it comes to what you consider a budget deck on Magic Arena. And I will see you guys next time.